Hello everybody and welcome to our first C programming tutorial. Without any further ado, let's begin. So, first things first, right? Let's talk about what topics we're going to be covering in this tutorial. So, we'll cover variables, how one can go about naming a variables and rules that one has to abide by, right? And then we'll talk about data types, just few data types that we have in C. Then we'll get to discuss how one can go about displaying information to the user. Then we'll cover format specifiers, which we need for our function that we use for displaying information. And we also need those specifiers on the function that we'll be using to get the information from the user. The way this is going to go, right, is we're going to start with variables, how one can declare a variable, right? Then we'll discuss the data types. Then we'll go to demonstrate how one can create a variable. So it's going to be a step-by-step process, just so that you guys don't get confused or get to be disencouraged at the end with the whole thing is just being done at the same time. So we're just going to build it step by step. You know something, let's implement it, and so on and so on, right? Cool. So let's dive right into variables, right? So what is variables, right? So a variable, right, it's a container that you use to store values in programming, right? So you want to store values in a container, which is named a variable. So that's why it's referred to as a storage container, right? Now, how one can go about declaring a variable? Well, let's look at the syntax. What we have is we have the data type. So you specify the data type that you want your variable to store. So this is the data type of the value that is going to be stored in this variable. Then obvious, you have to have the name for your variable. Then how do you store a value in a variable, right? So you need an operator, which mostly known as equal sign, but in coding or in programming world, we call this guy the assignment operator. So it assigns a value to a variable, right? It assigns a value to a variable. Cool. Now let's discuss how one can go about naming a variable. Now naming variables, right, there are rules that you have to follow to name a variable. These rules doesn't say you have to name your variable this way. No, it tells you of the things or the characters your variable can have and the characters they are not supposed to have. Cool. You can name a variable anything as long as it doesn't have the characters it's not supposed to have. Cool. So number one, well, when you start your naming your variable, right, the starting character can be any letter from A to Z. That's why we can begin with any letter from A to Z. The first character, it can also be an underscore instead of a character or any letter from A to Z, which can be in lowercase or uppercase. In my case, I just have it lowercase, right? It's just alphabet, right? It can also start with an underscore, right? Then it can contain numbers. So the first two rules say that when you start naming your variable, you can start with any letter from A to Z, or you can start with an underscore. Number two, it can contain numbers or digits from 0 to 9, right? Any number that can be formed with 0 and 9. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? You can have it in your variable name, right? As long as you know that the first character is reserved only for characters which are alphabets A to Z or an underscore, and that's it. The remaining ones, you can have numbers, right? But bear in mind, it is case sensitive. if you have an alphabet A, if you have alphabet A which is in capital letter, which is in caps, and the small letter A, these two are different, right? So if you have a variable that has any character or any alphabet that is of an uppercase, and the other one, or the way you use it with an alphabet that is of lowercase, those two variables are considered two different variables and not the same. So that's what case sensitivity means. Cool. Now, whatever you do, please don't include any characters in your variable name. No $sign, no hashtag, no percentage sign, no. That is illegal in C. So you cannot do that. Last but not least, you cannot name your variable the same as keywords, which we will discuss, but keywords are the reserved words with special functions throughout any program that you will write. So these are predefined functions with certain keywords. So those words cannot be used to define a variable, right? Because your compiler will be confused as to whether how do you want a function that performs a certain action to store a value, because it's not a variable, it's a function designed to do an action, right? Cool. So now that we've discussed about variables, let's talk about the data types, which is a component that we need, right? So data type. So we have different kind of data type. The first type that we'll discuss is the numeric type, which is divided into three categories. First one being the integer. So an int is a number without a decimal, or mostly known as whole number, or whole numbers if they're integers, right? Then we have a float and a double. This falls under the same category, and we define these numbers as numbers with decimal. Is the opposite of integer. Cool. And then we come to the second type, which is the type that deals with text, right? So we only have one type, which is a char. It's a string of ASCII values, right? But then one will be asking, don't we have a type by string? Well, it is there, but it comes from char, right? So we'll discuss about strings in a later stage. For now, let's just focus on just characters, which are defined as string of ASCII values. Now, ASCII values, right? Every character, if it's an equal sign, if it's an and sign, it has a value that is assigned to it. So those are ASCII values. So we'll discuss in future tutorials what an ASCII table is, because it's gonna get to a point where we are comparing two characters. So we're not really, when you're comparing two characters, I mean, you can't really say A is greater than B or B is greater than A, right? But then there is something that you can use. So since these characters are stored and assigned a value in memory, we will use the values that they're assigned to compare them. Cool. Now that we've done with we're done with the data types, let's head over to our online compiler. Yeah, just to keep it simple and to keep this tutorial easy to follow, I'm just gonna use an online compiler. So it's jdoodoo.com, and we're just gonna give it a moment or two to finish loading. There we go. So what we have there is all the languages, right? You can choose any language of your choice, but what we want is C. Since we are on C, so we're gonna select C. Let's get rid of this guy. Cool. This is what we have. Then this is the format, or this is the layout, which is not so nice. So you will go over to this button and click this button, and then we have ourselves a very nice layout. But then we don't like this, right? So control plus, there we go. Now we're able to see text easily, so you can see that you can also adjust this as well. Cool. So the compiler that we're using on this one is compiler, it's a GNU compiler collection version 11.1.0. You can choose any version, but in this case we're just going to use the version 11.1.0. Cool. And then what we have there is std in. This is standard input, right? We're going to deal with this later on. Command line argument, same thing. The way you execute your code, you're going to use that blue button that is on it, and then your results are there. Cool. But we want to be here, and what the hell is this? So we want to eliminate all that and start a program afresh. Now here comes a bit of a complicated part. Right now, how do you start coding? Do you just come here and start coding? Nope, that's not how it's done in C. So in C, you have to first set up your environment. The way you do that is that you're gonna import a certain library for allowing you to use input and output functions, right? Then you're gonna have a main method. That's where your program runs. So that's the method that runs your program. You can have other functions or other methods which we'll discuss in future tutorials, but they will always be run on the main method. Cool. So let's break down the setting up of your coding environment. So you have a hashtag, and then you're gonna have a keyword include. Then you see the color changes, right? Then you're gonna have a space, and then it's a less sign and a greater sign, and then we're gonna go in between. So what we're gonna type is std, that's standard, and then it's input, I for input, O for output, .h. That's the library that we need, right? Then we need to have a main method. So it's int main. The reason why it's int is because it returns a number. So whenever your code compiles successfully, it returns 0. Whenever your code compiles unsuccessfully, it returns a 1. Cool. So you're gonna have parentheses, then you're gonna have curly braces, and then this is it. But then by default, if you don't provide the return value, your value that will be returned by this function is 0. I know some other languages, they tend to be strict in terms of that you have to specifically or explicitly return a value. In this case, that's not the case. In this case, it just returns 0 if you don't specify the value to return. So normally it's return 0, but by default you can choose not to have this, but as we go further you will see why you actually need, or at least try to have this value, right, once you get to have different conditions. But for now, let's not worry ourselves about that and just keep it as simple as possible, right? So we discussed data types, right? We discussed variables. So what we're going to do now is to demonstrate how do one go about declare a variable. I know, right? You told me this is how I declare a variable. I saw that. But then now, how do I do it in code? I mean, English is something else, code is something else. Yes, you showed me the syntax, but I have to know how to do it in code. Let's get down to that part, right? So what we have is we're just going to specify the data types that we have. So you see that I have 2 slashes, right, and they turned green. So this is a comment. So this is me telling my compiler that I just want to write a text to explain what I'm doing below it or beneath it without it being part of the program. That makes sense? Should? Cool. So what we're going to do here is just to indicate which data type we wanna declare a variable of, right? So we're gonna start with the numeric type. We have 3 different categories in which 2 are from one category, right? So we have an integer, right, which is an int. Then we're gonna have a float, right? Then we're gonna have a double, right? Then we're gonna go to numeric type where we only have a char or a character. Cool. This is what we discussed, and you might also learn a thing or two of how to actually code in a clean manner. But then you're still a beginning, or if you're a beginner, well, it might be a good thing to just follow through this. Then as you progress and improve your skills, you will be able to write nice clean code that is easy to follow and easy for someone else who didn't write it to understand. Cool. Let's declare the int, right? So to declare an int, the first part is you declaring or stating the type. So since we know that we want to store a value which is of an integer, right, we use int. So that's you naming the data type or declaring or specifying the data type that you'll be dealing with. Cool. Then we have a space, and then it's gonna come to the name of the variable. With the rules that we know, we're gonna apply them right now. So an integer is a number, right? Let's just call it a number. Cool. And then you have an assignment operator, and then you're gonna provide the value. Let's just call it 50. Then when you're done, you must leave that guy there. It's a semicolon. So this is you telling the compiler that this is my definition of a variable that I've declared, and it ends there. If you don't close it, and then your code wants to continue, right? So every coding statement you write, it's terminated with a semicolon, and you have successfully declared a variable of integer type. Congratulations. Now cool, let's get to the second part, which is a float. So a float, you specify the type as well. Then since it's a decimal, I'm going to name him decimal type 1. So just as I mentioned, you can have numbers in your variable, but you cannot start with the number. You'll get an error. Please try that just to explore the errors that you get to have. It makes it easy. Cool. Decimal. I'll just call it 12.6 or 12.3. Cool. Now let's go double. You guessed it right, it's double. And then you will notice that these colors changes. These are the keywords that I was talking about. You can't name your variable double because this is a data type. You're naming a data type of a data type. Now the compiler is going to be confused, right? Cool. So it's double. Then we're going to call him decimal 2. Cool. Then what we're going to do is we're going to declare, let's give him 100.3654 and then a semicolon. So this guy is capable of having many decimals, and then this guy is capable of having less decimals compared to this, but we'll talk about this in future tutorial, not this tutorial. Then we want to cover the last part, which is a character. How do you do that? It's char, and then it's a letter, right? Assignment operator. But now, do I just type the character as it is? No. What do I do then? A single quote. And then you provide any letter. Let's just provide capital letter A. Then don't forget to close. So if you compile this code, it should not give us any error, right? If we execute, this guy should execute without any error, and it executed. If you were on an IDE, it would have returned 1, but in this case, it's on line 1, it just shows nothing, right? And that's it for variables declaration. Let's head over to our slides and continue. Cool. So we have done declaring variables and dealing with data types. Now we want to deal with how you can display those variables along nice messages. You can just print 1 and that's it. Why? I mean, what is 1? Maybe at least print with the name of that variable. That okay, cool. Now what I'm doing is printing the variables, right? So we'll be using a method called printf. So this is a print function, right? Printf, it's a function that we're going to be using to display information. So that's the keyword, right? Printf is the keyword, then followed by an open parenthesis. So whenever we talk about open parenthesis, we're talking about circular brackets, right? Open parenthesis, then it's gonna be this part, which is gonna lead us to the topic under this one, which is a format specifier. So if you see the format, you have double quotes, then inside you provide a percentage sign, then inside there you specify there's a format specifier that you need. So this is the format specifier character. So if it's an integer, it is assigned a certain character for it. If it's a char, same thing, integer, same thing, and double, same thing. And then a comma, right? And then a variable, right, that you just declared. So there's the variable name that you just declared, then a closing parenthesis. Obviously, if it was coding, you would have added a semicolon, but this is just the slides. Cool. Now, before we head over to display our information, we have to learn the format specifiers because we need them in order for us to use the output function. So first one being integers, right? So with integers, if you saw the format, it's percentage, then a character. So it can either be D or I. It can either be D or I. Let's talk about the float. So with the float, it can be F, that's it, right? For double, it's LF. For char is C. Does that make sense? I do hope it does. Now let's head over to code and check it out. Cool. So we've declared our variables, right? But now we want to do something. Displaying information. Cool. To display information, you need a print function. So as the definition goes, is print f. Now it changes, right? Now you know that you have your keywords, right? Open parenthesis, close parenthesis, it automatically closes for me. And then I want to have a string. So a string is or a string value is under inside double quotes, not single quote. Single quote is for chars or characters, double quotes is for string. But then we'll get to this part at a later stage. Cool. Followed by a percentage sign, then you have to specify. So we're going to start with the integer and then move down to the character. So if it's an integer, it can be D or it can be I. Let's start with D. Then we provide the variable name, right? But then it's not just nice. Okay, cool. Let's just execute this first. And then don't forget to terminate your statement with the semicolon. So it's 50, right? But then this is not nice. I mean, you're just presenting a number. What is that? So you want to display some text before you display the number, right? So this is saying that print this number at this position. So if you want to have a message before, it will come before, it will come there before, right? So let's just say this is number, and then we have that, and then we can just move the space, and that's it, right? And then print my number. But then I want to also show you something, because this printf method, there's something that it's missing. It doesn't move the keys to the next line. So say for instance it's that there, right? What it's going to do is it's going to print number, and then it will give you the value, and then it ends there. If you want the cursor to go down, you have to do something. You have to add an escape character, which is n. So it's slash and then n. N is for new line. But we'll talk about this, the escape characters later on. But now if I do execute, I'm going to have a nice message. This to me is nice, right? I'm doing something. As a beginner, I am going from one level to another level without just doing something which is just pointless. Not that it's pointless to start using just printing the number as it is, but you would want to just also dive into just having a nice message. I mean, you can write a program that gets the user's information. So as user as well, you need to get the input first before you just start typing, right? Cool. Now let's do a float. So a float is the same thing. So we want that to be decimal 1 space, and then it's a percentage, and then its float is f, right? And then we want to end line as well. Then it's decimal 1, then a semicolon. Let's finish up the other ones as well. Print f, and then it's decimal 2, and then it's percentage, and then it's lf, and then it's gonna be end line, and then it's decimal 2, and then it's a slash. No, it's a semicolon, I meant. And then we're gonna finish up with the char. So it's print f, then what we have is a letter, then a colon, and then we're gonna have a percentage, and then it's gonna be c, and then end line. So you see how it changes to be the same color as the printf. That shows you that you did the right thing. But for lf it's a bit different. What it is, you haven't done anything wrong. I know red is for danger, but this is just the colors the online compiler is using. So we are done. We expect this to execute perfectly fine, right? So let's execute this and see. Everything is there. A number, 50, decimal, there we go, decimal 2, there we go, letter, there we go. So you have all that, right? And that's how you display your variables with a bit of a special message, of course. Now let's head over to the last part on our slides, which is going to be not that complicated but easy to follow through, which is printing out information. So what we have is getting information from the user, right? So what we're going to do is we want to use a method called scanf. This is the format, right? It's open parenthesis, and then a format specifier. You do need that. The format specifier is needed. And then you're going to have a variable, but then you will notice something that has been introduced there, an end sign. We'll talk about that at a later stage, but then this is referencing memory. You see how the equal sign does, right? It's referencing memory as well, that this value should be stored on this memory where this variable has been created, right? But we'll talk about that in future tutorials. Then we have a closing parenthesis. That makes sense. Now let's head over to our compiler, and then we explore this new concept we just learned. Cool. So what we have is getting user input. Now getting user input, right? So we make use of scanf, right? So it's scanf, open parenthesis. Obviously my compiler just autocompletes. But then now, what value do I want to store? So I already have those values down there, right? So I can just come here and say print f, and then I say done, end line, and then I cancel this for now. Then if I execute that, I will have an error because I don't have a semicolon. So that's the error that you get to have. And then this is what we have. So that's the case, right? You see where our case is down there. You just press on the screen and then it show you the location of the case. Then yeah, that's that. Now we wanna have different variables. So we're going to have an integer which gets the age. We're not going to do all of them because the format is still the same. So I'm just going to get the age, then get the letter, because this one you do need to know because it's a bit complicated as it seems, right? Declaring it is simple, but getting its user input or storing a value to it via the input is something else. Cool. So what we want is we're going to get the age. Then we're going to get a char, right? Which is just, let's just call it 12. And that's it. You declared it, right? You declared this variable is stored in memory. But now I want to point to this memory to store the value that I'll be reading from the input, right? To do that, I'm going to use, so first thing first, right? I want to prompt the user. I don't want to just allow the user to get the input and that's it. I want to prompt the user, right? What is your age? But you could just do that. And then since it doesn't end line, oh, we don't want to end line. Cool. Then we're gonna have scan f. Then we're gonna have age, right? So if its age is int, which is just I, obviously not int, and then we have age. There we go. But we're missing this. It has to point to the memory that the variable has been created in, right? Then if I run this, it runs, but if I say 50, there's nothing, right? And this brings us to this part. It wants you to provide the input before you even execute. I know it's complicated, but not that complicated. This is just this compiler, but then if you were to run it in your own compiler, it would have been just simple and straightforward. But in this case, since it wants you to provide the input first, we head over then provide the input, which is 20, and we execute. Then it's done, right? Now, to see that this value has been stored successfully, we can use a print f. And then we have age, same way we did, but then we want to specify that this is an integer. So for now, let's use d since we've already established I. And then we want to end line, and then it's age, right? If we execute this, there we go. What is your age? And then it prints age is that, so it doesn't end line. So if you want to end line, just head over to this. Once you're done getting the age, and 9. Oh, it doesn't end the line. So in this case, wait, it didn't end the line, right? No, I didn't, because I'm also new to this compiler, which makes it fun for me to make these videos because I'm also learning at the same time. So I'm just providing the input, but then what I want there is just a next line. That's it. So you can just do that, then you end with the semicolon. Then if you execute, there we go, age is 20. So this is the prompt, and then the value is being read from there. What if I didn't provide any input? What was going to be the output? 0. Remember when I said that in integer, our function, right, this function returns 0, right? But then if we don't specify that by default, it's been assigned to 0. So that's going to be that. If it compiles successfully, it will return 0. If it doesn't compile successfully, it will not return 0. So that return statement is just to indicate that the program ran until that statement. If it didn't, then there was a problem somewhere, somehow in your code, right? Cool. Now let's head over to a character. Now a character is quite interesting. So it's char, right? Let's go back to this char. But then now, in order for you to successfully declare this variable, there's something that you need to do. But for now, let's just say that we're using what we learned from the slides and just go ahead and do what we know. Print f, then you have your specifier, which is just a character, right? Then no, not really a character, but you want to know enter your fav character or alphabet actually, or letter. Let me just say letter. Then a space. Then what do? You end that, right? But you don't want to end the line because you just want to write the number in the same line, and then you provide the scan f function that is going to be having a specifier c, right? And then you have an end line after that because we don't, but then besides we saw that this didn't work for the previous time, so let's just avoid that. And then we have fifth, but then we must point to the memory of that variable using an and sign, and then we add. Cool. After that, what we want to do is we want to display that, so you can just put an end line first, then you provide fifth, that's the name, and then you provide the specifier, right, character, and then you also want to end the line, then it's f. Was that too much? Don't worry, just take your time to fully understand the concepts and you will get there. You have the video, you can watch it as many times as you want, and you can break it down according to your understanding until you get to the full understanding of the concepts. Now, if we execute this, there we go, we just have a dot. Why? We didn't provide the input, right? So if I provide h, what happens? I just have h. There we go. So I have successfully done my, or declared my character, right? Input, if I use b, it's the same thing. B is gonna appear, right? And that's how you declare a variable and get the input. And this brings us to the end of this first tutorial video, which I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, leave a like and a comment, and do subscribe if you're new. Yeah, so that you don't miss out the new tutorials, because we're gonna be having every of these tutorials every Tuesday, along with C++. It's funny how I'm gonna record C++ right after this, but yep, besides it's the same thing, it's the same language. So yeah, enough of that. I shall see you guys next week Tuesday. Enjoy and happy C programming.